Ryan Glover. I wanted to do this video. A lot of times people ask me, how do I get celebrity interviews? And I've interviewed a number of different public figures, celebrities, politicians, and I wanted to share a little bit about my approach to social media creation. So, like, I started off as an intern for the John Kerwin Show, Jewish Life Television, and he would give me access to an IMDb Pro account. That's the Internet Movie Database, and basically through the Internet Movie Database professional site, you can access people's publicists. And so I would contact people and send cold emails to different publicists for celebrities that lived in California and try to get them to appear on the show, like, which was one day out of the month. And some people would respond, some people wouldn't. And I realized, like, it was really hit or miss, because it was dependent on if they were available, like, that specific day. Some people would ask me, like, if they were available for virtual interviews, and like he wasn't. He was only doing in-person interviews at a studio in Encino. But like, I later moved from Los Angeles to Utah, and like when I moved to Salt Lake, I decided, like, I wanted to do interviews still, and so I started blogging. And one of the rules that they had at the John Kerwin Show, I couldn't interview anyone, like, who was a criminal, like, had been arrested in the past, or like, had done, like, a sex tape. And so, like, I had the idea of, like, what if I flipped that idea upside on his head, and I had the concept of, like, interviewing adult film stars. So I started writing at a blog, and initially I was just doing phone interviews, and I would, like, transcribe the interview and write a blog and post it. And those blogs were pretty successful. I wrote for a site called Slickster, and they got hundreds of thousands of views, like, right away. And I did that like a number of times, and the views were like pretty great. And I was able to interview a number of, like, musicians, and I was going out to, like, different shows. They would give me free tickets, like, contacting publicists, writing reviews about, like, the shows. I saw, like, Neil Diamond 50th anniversary tour. I was able to, like, go and see Filthy Rich. That's when I started my YouTube channel, and it was the first video on my first YouTube channel, and it got 100,000 views when I asked him about not being welcome in seminary, and he laughed it off. I went and interviewed Seth's crew, and, like, they kind of got upset because I hadn't really read their biographical information and started screaming at me. And I wrote a blog about it for Audio Fuzz. And it was a number of other, like, Mims. I interviewed him when he came to Salt Lake, and did a pretty good interview. And I really enjoy, like, doing the interviews, particularly because at the time I was studying in a graduate program for journalism. And I was also working in the journalism field, working at the Department of Veteran Affairs. So it seemed like a good fit for me. I was able to interview Governor Gary Herbert, who was the governor of Utah at the time. And then I interviewed Congressman Chris Stewart. So I had, like, a lot of success early on. But I wanted to do, like, more. And eventually I got the opportunity to move to Massachusetts. And I was going to graduate school at Harvard Extension. I was writing for Hip Hop My Way before school started. And I got hired there through Saigon, and I was able to, like, be able to go to more shows. And I remember, like, going to see artists like, KRS and Onyx, and at the Middle East, which is, like, a concert venue that used to be in Massachusetts. I think it's since closed down. I'm not 100% sure on that, but, like, it was a very, like, famous concert venue in Cambridge. And I really enjoyed, like, just the overall atmosphere of being in Boston, because it seemed like it was so many great artists that came through, and then, like, different political figures. There was always, like, something going on, and I got to be able to interview a lot of different people. I remember Yes Jules came and did a sneaker signing when she came out for Puma, and I was able to interview her. Scotty ATL, he was opening up for Ace Hood, and I was able to interview him. And that was, like, I think one of the amazing parts. I remember meeting John Kerry, like, when he was doing his book. And I remember, like, meeting Ayanna Presley. And then I was able to go out to different events because of the 2020 election. And I remember catching, like, a video of, like, Bernie Sanders telling, like, a baby to be quiet, which the video footage ended up on CNN. And I was really proud of that. Even though I didn't get credited for it, or it didn't count toward my YouTube channel, I started doing Zoom interviews like prior to COVID. The person who gave me the idea about using Zoom and introduced it to me was Professor Griff. I had interviewed him. I was requesting to interview him via Skype, and he suggested we do it via Zoom. And I started doing a number of interviews, like, way before COVID had started. So like when COVID started, I already had the infrastructure in place to be able to do Zoom interviews. And so I was able to get a number of really big Zoom interviews with people who I wouldn't have probably been able to interview via Zoom because they were more likely to do in-person interviews. But I was able to interview Michael Blackson. I interviewed Josh Johnson. And I have a history of interviewing comedians because when I lived in Salt Lake, I interviewed Bert Kreischer. That was a really big interview at the time. He's gone on since to do his own feature film and obviously has a very successful podcast. I interviewed people like Tommy Davidson over the phone. And I was having a lot of success, doing the Zoom interviews, and my channel was growing significantly. I later, moved to Pennsylvania, and I continued. I would utilize one source, and that was Black News. And one of the great things about Black News, and I feel like is underutilized, is they put the publicist information for people who are looking to be interviewed. And sometimes, you'll see, really known actors or musicians, but there's just people who are very much interested in talking to you and open to the idea of media, because some people don't trust media, because there's a lot of people out here who are kind of ruining it for people who do media the right way, who ask rude, salacious questions, or just try to get clickbait, or try to have a viral moment. And that's not what I do. I really try to ask thoughtful questions and not exploit people. I do ask tough questions. I do the research, and I don't shy away from questions, but I don't try to ask anything rude or intrusive. So living in Pennsylvania was really great, and I felt I was making a lot of headway. Eventually, I ended up going back to Chicago, which is my hometown. And I was able to start doing interviews again. I interviewed a producer who had worked with Kanye West, Sinister Beats, to start off. And I started going back to doing the adult film interviews, which was great for engagement. But after a while, you get kind of tired of them, because I feel those questions and stuff, there's only so much. And I feel it also deters other people from doing your channel. There's people who told me they wouldn't do interviews with me specifically because of the adult interviews. Well, one of them was Oliver North, which really made me reflect and think that I wanted to do greater content. I went to LA a little bit before the SAG-AFTRA strike, and I was working at Dash Radio, and that was the first time actually working in a radio show. And then the SAG-AFTRA strike had started. I was able to interview, Francis Fisher when the WGA strike had started, right before the SAG strike had started. And I, had a number of interviews with people from different unions. And after the SAG-AFTRA strike, I was able to interview Benzino, which I feel was a really great interview. And then Auden Wiley, who's the daughter of Noah Wiley. I think the best thing to do as far as interviews is to utilize the relationships with publicists. That's one of the things I always did. I appreciate all the publicists in the past who have worked with me and given me interviews. One of them being Edna Sims, who I was able to forge a relationship with for a while, and she was able to invite me during the SAG-AFTRA strike to the Little Black Miss America pageant, and I was able to interview a number of celebrity figures like Erica Gimple, famous gospel singer, and the lady who helped make one of the first Black Barbies. So I think a lot of that has been really incredible, to have these opportunities. And one thing I would say for people who are looking to create content, reach out to publicists, make relationships with them, go to events, network with people. And I feel leverage those relationships and stuff to, get interviews, especially don't be afraid to invest in yourself. That's one of the things I've really been able to do this year, is to invest in high quality content. And even if you don't have like the money to do that, like, you know what I mean, there's nothing wrong with using your iPhone or a laptop.